Hi, everybody. Hi to the public I can see, and welcome to the extraordinary participants of this talk I may introduce to you. My name is René Aguigah, and we are going to talk about colonialism and about memory and memories and the different kinds of memories in Namibia and India and Germany. And I welcome first Urvashi Butalia. She's an author and an historian, publisher from India. One of her books is called The Other Side of Silence. It's her most famous book. And I welcome Nelago Shilongoh, a theater maker in Namibia. And I welcome Mark Terkessidis, author and researcher in Germany. Welcome to all of you. Can you say anything so that I can check if we hear each other?
Thank you.
Yeah, we heard you.
Okay.
Thank you, René.
Now I'm hearing all of you. That's good. This is a very complex topic, I think, and because this is the case, I tried to ask you for a first round for only one thought. If you had the impossible task to speak about the memory culture in your country, what would your answer be? Yeah, Urvashi.
Okay, René, that's, as you said, an impossible question. You said it yourself. I think it's a really difficult question to answer. So what I'm going to do is pare it down a bit. I'm assuming that you're talking about, let's say, traumatic memories of moments in our history, which are also born out of the encounter with colonialism, possibly. The memories of that time, I think, are differently held by different people. So the culture would be a complex one. For victims or survivors who've lived through that time, it is really important to hold on to that memory. For communities who've been traumatized, it's really important to hold on to that memory. For the state, the memory, the investment in that is a bit different. So for example, if we look at the moment when India became independent of British rule in 1947 and was simultaneously divided into two countries, the violence that accompanied the division, the partition of the country, our state does not want to remember that because it is not, it interrupts the story of the triumphalist story of independence. So you get people's culture of memory, you get the state's culture of memory. Sometimes the two overlap, sometimes they conflict. But for people, it's really important to say, we will not forget because it's part of the battle of justice. It's part of the battle of recognition, and it gets passed through the generations.
So thanks a lot. This is definitely more than one thought because it's an impossible question to answer, of course. I keep in mind, we will not forget for the first moment. Perhaps Nelago, you want to continue?
Yes, I mean, it is a very difficult task to answer that question. I think the first thoughts that I have when I heard the question was really, especially back at home in Namibia, we're in a very heightened space. Everything feels quite overwhelming now, especially from inclusive of a micro to a macro level. We are confronted with a lot right now. And we are confronting a lot right now. We are confronting our leadership. We are confronting communities and generations here from the Afrikaans community, from the German community, settlers that have that are now based here. And we're confronting a lot of what has happened, what is going on now, what needs to be given back. So we're talking about justice, we're talking about reparations, we're talking about repatriation. So it's a very difficult, heightened, I would say messy conversation and confrontation that we are sitting with right now. So we are in a position where we are also trying to tell a different story, addressing the story, the narrative that has been given to us, and really trying to pause, take a minute back, be it from the artistic space, be it from the activist space, also with the very plural based space within our leadership. We're really trying to tell a different story, but I must say it to discuss culture and to discuss memory and to discuss how the history and present marry now is very much a very difficult time for us right now, but we are definitely sitting with it, as difficult as it should be.
Mm-hmm. Is it okay to keep in mind, above all, the word confrontation, messy confrontation, confrontation as messy conversation? Yeah. Just for the moment. Okay. Mark, when you think about cultural memory and your country, what is even your country?
Germany. No doubt about that. Although I'm of Greek origin, actually, so there is another place to the German history, but nevertheless, it's the German history. I was born and raised in the Federal Republic, but especially because of my origin, maybe I have the impression that the German memory culture is too narrow. That was the one thought. It is too narrow because traditionally Germany's memory culture is focused on the Jewish experience, on the Shoah, which is pretty comprehensible considering the sheer dimension of the crimes. But in recent times, new groups have articulated their experience with German history, and this is coming from the inside and the outside at the same time. So it is coming from the inside as a phenomenon of the multiplicity of the people of Germany right now. So like Germans talk about the colonial history overseas. People from different origins talk about their history with Germany, but it's coming from the European context too, where, for example, Poland and Greece are stating the fact of the war crimes of the German forces in World War II. And this is a story which is actually now becoming part of the German memory culture too. The new government has recently acknowledged that, but it is a discussion which is about the forgotten victims of Second World War. And I think everything is connected, you know. So we have three different discussions now. One discussion is about the Shoah, one discussion about the colonialism overseas, and one about the forgotten victims of Second World War. But I think it's more connected than we think before. So I mean, I can elaborate on that, but personally, first of all, it's too narrow and we have to broaden the perspective, in my opinion.
Okay, so what is too narrow in the German cultural memory is the established form of cultural memory.
Yes, that too. It goes both ways. It is only about one group and one type of incident in a way, so it does not take the long perspective into account. And on the other side, yeah, I don't know about your experiences in your countries, but I think German memory culture is quite fixed on building a monument. So if we want to think about the Holocaust, for example, we need to have a memorial. And other groups in Germany are actually saying we need a memorial too. But what is actually interesting about thinking about our history is that what Nelago said, that there has to be a messy confrontation. So we have these kind of very torturing debates about memory culture in Germany too. And I think that this kind of torturing debates are sometimes more valuable than the monument itself. So the society has to come into some kind of exchange to remember the history of a country and the involvement of the country in a history of oppression, actually.
Is there a messy conversation on these topics in India too, Urvashi?
You know, René, I'm very interested. This messy confrontation idea that Nelago put forward. is a really interesting idea, and really it kind of makes you think. And what Mark was saying about discussions, I was quite intrigued, because when you look at it from outside, so it's interesting what looks different to you from inside, what looks different from the outside. To us in India, and I guess elsewhere, looking at the way the Holocaust is remembered in Germany, and looking at the way those memories are confronted, and also looking at the monuments, because we have none. Mm-hmm. It is really, has in some ways been very inspirational, thinking that yes, countries can actually confront their memories, confront their troublesome memories. So also looking at the way South Africa and other countries in Latin America have done this. We actually have no such culture. Mm. Or at least we have been very, very reluctant to confront our past. We kind of seem to think, and this may be a gross generalization, but we kind of seem to think, sweep it under the carpet and it'll all go away. We don't have one memorial to partition in this country. We don't have any discussions about how human beings lived through that time. And not only partition, we have so many incidents of sectarian violence. Look at what's happening in Kashmir in our country. We should be talking about it, yeah. But we don't. We don't, partly because those conversations are very difficult ones, as Nelago said, to confront, because in some ways you have to confront your own complicity. Mm-hmm. You know, in a sense, I mean, I don't know if I'm, again, making a gross generalization, but a moment like the Holocaust, initially the studies said, okay, the Nazis and the Jews. So you had the good guys and the bad guys. Now it's much more complex, of course. But for us, looking at something like the partition, there were no good guys or bad guys. Everybody was complicit in some way or the other in the violence. So in order to study that, to talk about that, to confront those difficult memories, you have to confront your own complicity. And I think we're not ready to do it. So in a sense, there is a deep reluctance and silence, while the memories are so throbbingly alive and troubled inside families and inside communities that you get these two very contradictory things happening. It's only begun to change in the last 20 years or so.
To make things even more complicated, is there only one event you have to remember or to deal with in a kind of history politics in India? Of course, you talk about partition, but 1947, but perhaps there are even more events.
Hundreds. Yeah. There is the identity-based violence that we have seen. There's violence against lower castes, which is an ongoing thing, and that violence is in some way so naturalized that I use the word within quotes, that it is, you know, to question it means you have to take that extra step, and a lot of people don't question it. So in such a large country where there are such deep inequalities and hierarchies as India, there are bound to be many, many histories that need actually to be remembered, to be talked about, to be opened up, but that hardly happens.
Mm-hmm. Similar question to you in Namibia. Is there only the events or the relationship between Namibians and Germans, or is it also the relationship towards South Africa, for instance, and the liberation 1990?
Yes, we have a very long history that obviously began as early as the 1820s, 1830s, if I can talk about the colonial experience with the Finnish, and then with the Germans, and then with the Africans from South Africa with apartheid. So our experience and our journey has been a very long and painful one that has definitely worked together to produce a particular personality, a particular narrative, a particular story. And interestingly enough, especially with our coupled terror, if I can say, and relations with Germany and South Africa, it's definitely something that is still installed today. It's definitely an event or an experience that is still articulating itself today with Germany, with the monuments that are installed, with the aesthetics, the visuality of the landscape that is still very much reminding you of white terror domination. Is still very much reminding us of the project of colonialism, the project of supposed supremacy over Black people in Namibia. And that is the same with the Afrikaans, our apartheid colonialism experience, which came to front as early as 1920, when we were handed over as a mandate to South Africa. Even with the monuments and the visuality of the landscape, the visuality of our spaces in the different towns, one is still very much reminded until today what it means to be, or the supposed objective of being under South African or white South African rule. So the discussion is also very much interlinking the project of the Afrikaans and the German communities against Black communities or Black majorities in Namibia, and how, interestingly enough, the historical process or the objection or the objective or the aim of white supremacy very much worked hand in hand between the Afrikaans and the German community, even though in the public narrative, in education, and in as how history is written, it likes to be told in an opposition manner, that the Germans and Afrikaans were working against each other, but in the ultimate way, they were also working together in terms of what white supremacy and colonialism works for. I'm saying a lot, but I'm saying that we are still reminded every day, and the project and the objectives of apartheid and of German colonial rule is still very much adamant in our communities today, in our countries today, and reminded every day with different symbols and installations that are still surviving until today, to associate, how time, place, and events in our colonial experience has happened and are still relevant today.
Urvashi just said that in India, the German type of memory culture, or culture of memory, sometimes has been a kind of inspiration. Are there any Namibians who think similarly?
Please repeat that.
The German way of Aufarbeitung, or of culture of memory, of history, politics, seems to be a kind of inspiration for many countries in the world, and for India too, as Urvashi said earlier. I just wanted to know if there are some Namibians who think similarly.
Actually, not only German, but other countries too, I said. South Africa. I
South
said
Africa.
other countries too. South Africa, Latin American countries.
Yeah, of course. Of course. I don't want to doubt this. Perhaps one could add that South Africa has had an accent of this Truth Commission, and not so much perhaps on monuments or so.
Yes, I mean, if I can speak about our experience and our discussion that we are having with the issue on memorizing through monuments. I mean, as I said, our spaces are very much installed with monuments that are echoing the project of colonialism. We are also just sitting with a discussion as to, do we really need monuments, especially our particular experience with monuments, which has always been violent, which has always been threatening, which has always been reductioning of very many other people. And our conversations that we're having now as to how we have been memorizing ourselves, how we have been performing rituals to present ourselves, to to echo ourselves in historically, in the present, and in the future. So we are currently, there is a general tone in the air, particularly with our own experience with monuments. We are not too excited about monuments, especially from German colonialism to apartheid to newer struggles that we are having now with leadership, and how that also transforms or survives itself through newer monuments as well. So there is a general discussion that is contesting memorization through monuments, and we are sitting with alternative ways as to how we want to memorize ourselves, how we want to tell our stories, how we want to remember ourselves, how we want to represent ourselves, be it tangible or non-tangible. So that is just to say our experience with monuments is not one that is one to necessarily celebrate, because it has been a very difficult relationship, the site and the body, and in relation to the events and times and places that we have engage in that way. And I hope that makes sense. But monuments is not something that we are necessarily celebrating at the moment. We want to do it otherwise because of that particular experience that has continued in itself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and when you listen to each other and all those different events, all those different lines of force, all those different different roles, like victims or yeah, I'm interested in the question if you yourselves recognize similarities, if you begin to compare all those different cases. Perhaps Mark.
May I add one thing about German memory culture to the discussion, that this kind of memory culture was pretty much not voluntarily. So there was high pressure from the outside, from a lost world war, from the Allied forces, from the Nuremberg Tribunal, from Israel, and so on Germany to start to remember. That was not done for the most part. It was not done voluntarily, especially not before 67, 68, when a young generation of students started to protest, and they actually wanted to remember. The generation before that actually wanted to forget. So there was the pressure from the outside, and then there was a pressure from, in a way, an alternative public from the inside, which led to this kind of memory culture we have in the Federal Republic right now. And maybe it's a little bit the same thing with South Africa. There was a big pressure from the outside on South Africa to stop with apartheid. So that was has become an international phenomenon at the time being. So I mean, Germany can be a model, but if we retell the history of German memory culture, then we can not only look at the positive side of things. So what have we remembered and what have we not remembered? Why didn't we remember the 3.3 million Soviet POVs who were actually starved to death in German camps during Unternehmen Barbarossa, the attack on the Soviet Union? 3.3 million. What is with the Polish citizens who were actually killed in a kind of genocidal campaign to put Poland back into some kind of colony of imperial Germany? So all this is quite recently only remembered because the memory culture was directed to the West. So now we actually start to broaden this culture with a younger generation, which is actually guilty of nothing in this dimension, has only the privileges of this kind of histories and has to reflect the privileges of this kind of history. So that is what I just wanted to add. So I think there is, I mean, in in Germany, I think that, I mean, if it comes to Namibia, there is an invisible Namibia in German history, actually, because colonialism is remembered only quite recently. For a long time, it was pretty much forgotten that even there is still these people stemming from the settler colony of German Southwest living in Namibia as Namibians. And now, actually, that was actually nobody still does know that in Germany. And if it comes to the question of street renaming and exactly restitution, for example, I mean, we have restituted 3 objects from German museums to our former African colonies. So that is, I think that it is impossible to compare these 2 kinds of memory culture, because you're on different ends of this memory culture. But nevertheless, there is an invisible Namibian in Germany, in German culture, and there is an invisible German or there is pretty much a visible German in Namibian culture. So these histories are intertwined, which I actually find quite interesting in this dimension, how we think about history in general. If we think about it as German history, this is the container of things happening inside of German borders, or if we think of Germany as a kind of hub of, you know, different transnational lines and connections and networks and so on. And I think that it's quite important to think about Germany or think about our culture, wherever that is, in these terms. And so we have an invisible history with India too. I mean, you know that Nazi Germany's ideology pretty much was based on the idea that the Indians were the first Aryans, and that our language is an Indo-Germanic language, and that these Aryans were kind of through many developments then became incorporated as Germans again, and we are now the Aryans. The Indians are not any longer, and that there also was an SS division of Indian descent in Germany. So there is also a common territory of history.
René, can I come in here?
Yes, of course.
So I want to come in on 2 things. One is I want to talk a little bit about monuments, which Nelago talked about. It's very interesting to look at the whole business of monuments and memory. So in Delhi, in India at the moment, there is a very vigorous debate going on, because the current government wants to break down the memory of colonialism contained in the buildings where the Viceroy lived in Delhi, which is a whole area called Central Vista. It's where our president now lives and the Houses of Parliament are, and where once the statue of King George stood, and then we took it down. Now that is a stunningly beautiful part of the city. And there is a lot of anger at taking that memory down, not because we want to retain the memory of colonialism, but because we want to retain that piece of history, no matter that it might have been constructed by the colonial masters, and because we fear what a new architect will bring to this place, will turn it into some American glass building and lose all that history. So I think it's very interesting to see how this whole business of monuments works. The second thing is, I'm not saying that this image of Indians, me, one of the Indian scholars working on memory, standing there and saying, oh, wonderful, Germany is doing this, and this is an inspiration. I'm not talking about that. Sorry if I gave that impression. It's not.
I haven't understood you this way.
Yeah, okay. But I just wanted to say it's not that. I think it is true. I mean, what I would say is it's like an onion. When you start to take apart memories, obviously what Mark is saying, much more emerges. With each layer that you take off, something new will come. So it's not as if the work of memory is kind of done and dusted and you've got the memory of the Holocaust and it's done. We are also finding here, when we started to look at the memories of partition, I say that because I've worked on that the initial stories are now much more nuanced by all the complexities and ambivalences, things that lie underneath. Similarly, the story of the victimization of the Jews in Europe cannot be separated from what they've done to the Arabs in Israel and Palestine. So in a sense, memory is deeply complex and new things come all the time. But what I'm saying is that here in this country, especially to do with moments like the partition or with what's going on in Kashmir right now, it is an impossibility, or it's not an impossibility, I'm sorry. It's very difficult to discuss across the ways in which identities have hardened. And you need to have a discussion that allows you to be vulnerable, allows you to accept your own role in it, and allows you to see that human beings can do terrible things to each other. And one of those human beings might have been your father or your mother or your uncle or somebody. That kind of thing is not happening as much as it should here for all the memories that we need to talk about. And I find that devastating. Mm. Some ways, that's, I think, what I was trying to say. And when I first went to Berlin, which was only about 10 years ago, I was struck by, the visible evidence of living memories. I suppose Berlin is the city in some ways, which we don't have here at all. Even the border between India and Pakistan, there's nothing there that tells you that a huge history unfolded here. Sorry, I'll stop talking.
I'd have another question for you, because just when you were talking about monuments, it came to my mind the question, if you could explain to us how memory or culture of memory has changed with Modi in power in India. There must have been any kind of change, or is this a dumb question?
No. There's a very, very major change, and the suppression of certain kinds of memories is now backed by state power. And also there is the contestations and the confrontations that Nelago was talking about. Now there is a battle about, yes, if your memory of X moment is X, then we have another memory of that moment, which is Y, and that also has to come out. So there is a kind of, it's even more difficult to talk about difficult memories and to talk about the violence that has been done to vulnerable communities now, because we are living in a very, very majoritarian moment. And therefore, the only discourse that is freely allowed is the majoritarian discourse. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Don't you have questions to that, Nelago or Mark?
I'm not an expert on India, to be true. It's always pretty difficult if you. I was in India once, but a lot of the recent experience with India stem from media coverage of India, and that doesn't make me an expert at all, to be true. So I'm really not the right person to have an input on on Modi, for example, or on Modi's and the change in memory culture.
Yeah, it's also a big country, and it's very complex.
It is a very complex country.
So anything I'm saying is just one view. There's much more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. But nevertheless, I have the impression that much of what you have been talking about, the three of us, has to do with kind of competition or concurrence of different stories, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, not exactly.
Struggles.
Evidently, you're hinting a little bit at Michael Rothberg's notion of the competitive memory versus the multidirectional memory, and I don't consider memory to be obliged to be competitive. I don't think so. I think with Rothberg, I think that memory can be multidirectional, and even more if we allow memory to be multidirectional, the different memories in history can, in a way, benefit from the experience from the other, or find out that they are actually intertwined with them, or that there is a connection between them. So if you think about Germany, for example, if we, in a way, very, very often right now we separate the discussion about colonialism from the discussion about Germany's expansion to the east, to Eastern Europe, to the Balkans, to the Ottoman Empire, and so on. And I think that doesn't make sense. There is this nice expression from a Canadian historian, Robert Gordon, who said that colonialism, especially in Germany, does not always have to follow the idea of the salt water theory. That means that there is the metropolis, and then there is salt water, and then there is the colony. But there can be colonies, adjacent colonies, very near colonies, neighboring colonies too. And I mean, a big part of the German imperialist project always was continental. So there were parts of Poland, Polish-speaking territories who belonged to Prussia or Imperial Germany for 150 years. There was a coherent plan of economic domination and a so-called moral conquest. And as we hear here with Goethe-Institut, moral conquest meant a foreign cultural policy, domination via foreign cultural policy. And that was a coherent plan for the Balkans, for the Ottoman Empire. There was this German idea, there was the idea of a German-ruled Middle Europe, which actually reached to Afghanistan, and the most visible infrastructural prototype of this economic penetration was the so-called Baghdad Bahn, this train you could ride from Berlin through the Balkans to Istanbul, and from there through to Baghdad, and that was the idea. So I mean, if we think about colonialism, then these two places of the German imperial expansion are not competitive. Actually, we can now back up the energy coming from Greece and Poland for reparations, for example, with the discussion about colonialism in Africa in Germany. That really makes sense. I mean, if you during World War II, German troops destroyed 1,600 villages in Greece, you don't do that if there is some kind of post-imperial history which allows you to destroy 1,600 villages in a different country. You think of yourself as superior, as you thought of yourself superior in an overseas colony. And I think that the multidirectional way of remembering could be very benefiting for all the different places of our discussion right now.
But to gain something like what you called multidirectional memory doesn't seem so simple in my eyes.
No.
When
right. Yeah.
When Nelago, just at the beginning of our conversation, said there were messy confrontations in her country.
Yeah.
I thought about competition at least. How do you cope with messy confrontations in this kind of conversation, Nelago, in Namibia?
Yeah, no, it's very complex. It's very, very complex because this confrontation calls for those to listen, for those to be heard, previously silenced or still the silence to be heard. It calls for a room to be sanitized, which may be an impossible task, to be sanitized for certain members of society to enter to a very neutral table and to discuss experiences, to discuss privilege, to discuss giving back, to discuss history, to discuss the future. So it's a very, very difficult task, especially when we want to talk about shared identity or shared memory, where we're coming from as a collective people, when we are dominated by hegemonic narratives, hegemonic perspectives of what a particular experience may have really have been, or a particular event may have really been. So it's really challenging, and a lot of us are saying it's a very almost impossible task to enter into the sanitized neutral space and to really get together and talk, because everyone wants to come with their terms and conditions. My terms and conditions are X. This person's terms and conditions are Y. So how do we garner, how do we commune at this table and really try to speak a common language in which we can really communicate and understand each other? So yes, and just picking up from Mark's sentiments about the coherent plan about colonialism, and just echoing as to what I understand Rothenberg, or how I was triggered to think about Rothenberg's work, is really just about how the project of colonialism is very interconnected. I would not like to think in a very what we are saying now, competitive approach to understanding memory and to understanding events and to understanding our experiences. Is very much interconnected. I just also reflecting on the book by Casper Ereschen and David Olusonga, titled "The Kaiser's Holocaust: Germany's Forgotten Genocide and the Colonial Roots of Nazism," which was a very interesting and very articulate a book that really spoke about how the colonialism in Namibia was very interconnected with the struggles of European power against each other. How the genocide against Herero and Nama people is very much linked to the Holocaust against Jews in Europe. So in terms of thinking competitively, no, but I think really how memory and experiences and history is interconnected, and how you can really trace the dots in different space and really find the channel in understanding our experience. And when we come into a space to understand that collective experience, it's almost an impossible task.
Yeah, very valuable reading tip. Thanks. I'd like to ask one question to what you were talking about these rooms, about these sanitized rooms to talk in. Could you elaborate on this a little in a more concrete way? What are sanitized rooms?
Sanitized rooms that we are all trying to be, I guess we are called to be as empathetic, as understanding, and as open-minded, in really trying to build community and in really trying to understand our experiences as people. And this very much calls for ourselves to be sanitized. And this is a metaphor that I like to use a lot. I come with my various stains. I come with my various inheritances. How am I supposed to undress that, commune into a space where we are supposed to kind of project towards a common language, or a common objective, or a common kind of experience? It's very hard, and that is just to say it's impossible to enter into these sanitized spaces where we all come with our own cultural values, we all come with our own ideologies, where we all come with our various associations. So this kind of ideological task to say let's enter into this neutral sanitized space it's redundant, I think, sometimes, because how can you listen in a sanitized space? How can you be heard in a sanitized space? How can you be angry in a sanitized space? How can you be held accountable in a sanitized space? We need to come with our mess. We need to come with our bags. We need to come with our baggage and really get down and dirty and try to understand and hear each other out.
But nevertheless, I mean, yeah, I think we have to get dirty, absolutely. But nevertheless, I think for the discussion not to get too competitive, or for the discussion to be intelligible for different partners in the discussion, you need some kind of moderation, and this moderation must come with some authority. So if you look at South Africa, for example, the Truth Commission had this authority. So this discussion there was moderated. I don't think that we need, for example, in Germany, an authority like the Truth Commission in South Africa. But nevertheless, I mean, we have all these. I mean, the public media, or the media in Germany are not a good platform to discuss very often, because discussion gets very polarized immediately. So if dirty means it becomes completely polarized in minutes, I don't think
all media, not all media.
Not all media. Sure, sure, not all media. Yeah, I mean, but couldn't that be in a way a task for example, for schools? Yeah, to in history lesson, to organize a moderated discussion inside Germany is country of immigration. So people of all these different origins are in Germany. They are have pupils from different origins in school, and they bring the memories of their parents and their grandparents to the table. And so why don't we have this kind of constant memory in school, and the discussion in school? Why don't we have it in a moderated way in public media? Why don't we have platforms, physical platforms? Yeah, why don't we have why don't we have, instead of a new monument, why don't we have a place to discuss all this with the helpful moderation? So I think one can organize all these places. And I mean, I'm sorry, I'm talking from from the perspective of a quite rich country. That is a difference to if you have the resources or not. But the Federal Republic definitely has the resources to moderate these discussions.
René, may I come in here very briefly?
Of course.
I'd like to just come back to that point of competitive memory that we are talking about. So, I mean, I think that point of Rothenberg's is valid, except that I also think that memory is about power. And it's something that we have not really talked about, because the memories that survive, that find a voice, are often those that come from places of power. So when in Rothenberg's work, he refers to somebody saying, why in the United States do we have so much about the memory of the Holocaust and we don't have the memory of slavery? What are you talking about? You're really talking about power over there, right? So in a sense, in the entire discourse in the world, and even in Rothenberg's own work, the frame of reference is the West. And it is as if you only really need to talk about memory in the West, and therefore you have the memory of the Holocaust and you have everything else. But there's a whole world out there where there are different kinds of memories that need to be talked about. And as everybody has pointed out, the interconnectedness of particularly that moment of the 40s, mid-40s onwards, if we are talking about the history of the World War and so on, but all kinds of other memories are also there. But if we just take that moment, its interconnectedness across the world means that really there is a lot that we have to talk about that comes out of that moment. And it isn't only the Holocaust. So I do feel that the competition for the stories that get forgotten all the time, or that get ignored, or that are constantly silenced, to find articulation, to find a voice, to amplify their voices, is a very legitimate search. And I think the idea of competition for me enlarges into that. And I just want to add a little funny detail, and not so funny, but also sinister detail about the connectedness, the interconnectedness. So one of the most popular books in India that still continues to sell and sell is Mein Kampf by Hitler.
Oh.
And you see the evidence of that in the huge growth of right-wing fundamentalism in this country and fascism of a kind. It comes from, I mean, their inspiration is Germany and Italy.
This is a very important detail, I think, sinister detail. Thank you. I just want, since we have to stop by 5 o'clock, I wanted to make the suggestion to be more explicit on the question of, or on the dimension of politics and of presence, because cultural memory, or the culture of memory, isn't only about the past, of course, and one possibility to be more explicit about the non-past dimension of all we are talking about is to ask, which connections do you see between the racisms of today and the memory of colonialism? Perhaps Urvashi first.
Can I maybe go just one brief moment back to what Urvashi said about the legitimacy of the competitive memory? I find that understandable if you relate the memory to power, but in a way I'm I would doubt that it leads to good results. If you look, for example, I mean, if you look at the example of the Armenian genocide, then the Israeli government actually was very competitive about the singularity of the Holocaust and never backed the Armenian government or other Armenian associations in their fight for recognizing the Armenian genocide, for example, against the Turkish government. And that was very competitive, or that is very competitive. But if I do it the same way to establish the memory of slavery, for example, then I, in a way, neglect the victims of Holocaust, or I neglect the victims of other crimes, and so and I don't see, and I don't make the connection, which is actually sometimes there, as Nelago actually said that the genocide of the Herero and Nama in Namibia was kind of a training field for the Holocaust. So these histories are intertwined. And I don't think you are right. It's legitimate to be competitive. That's understandable. But I don't think that it has good results. I really don't think that it has good results. And even if you have to compete, yeah, and sometimes you have to compete with more powerful memories, I think it's a good strategy not to be competitive in being competitive. You know what I mean?
I'm not saying be competitive. I'm not even saying it's about competition. Mm-hmm. I'm saying it's about power and it's about silence. And therefore, if Black people in the United States are saying, what about our stories? Yeah. Or if the Palestinians are saying, what about our stories? What about the Nakba? Why is the Nakba, the memory of the Nakba, pushed and pushed down? And why is it not possible for the Palestinians to peacefully commemorate that day in their memory? And why will the Israeli state not allow it? So in a sense, then you have to talk about how do those voices find articulation? And I think to see it as competition and to he makes the point that there isn't one space for which we are all jostling, sure. But actually there is a kind of singular space.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what's your thoughts about the connection between racism of today and kind of competition or battles about memory?
Are you asking me, or I think maybe...
I'm asking three of you, but you can start if you want.
No, Nelago, you start.
The connection of colonialism.
The connection of memory and racism of today.
Yeah, the connection of racism and memory. It's definitely, for me, it's connected to our colonial experience. And that is very much what my work is about, my artistic work, how the history and the present marry, and how they kind of formulate a canvas for the future, and how one's task is to really challenge to kind of draw that picture. However, you still have a canvas to work with. So I definitely think it's connected to colonialism. Definitely as to how our memories are also constructed, the hegemonic narratives, how those also influence our memories, and how that is influenced by people, areas of people activity. How does my education, which is linked to colonialism, affect my memory and my sense of self, and what I should be knowledgeable about, what I should not be knowledgeable about? How does that connect with politics and law? What even if I can talk about access to land, how I can identify with space and landscape. What landscape am I able or allowed to be identified with, and what am I not allowed to be identified with? What am I stripped away from, and what can I have? And that is connected to colonialism. If I can talk about economics, how colonialism has definitely designed our economical structures today, and how economics also affect my sense of memory. How am I tasked to participate in economics in a way that it strips off my sense of personhood? How am I tasked to become a matter that is meant to perform for a particular superstructure, in a way that I cannot formulate myself, I cannot memorize myself, I cannot construct myself, I cannot construct myself in a way that I'm meant to survive in a particular way, and that is connected to colonialism. So all these areas of people activity, economics, education, art, politics, law. So for me, that is how it's interconnected, and how everyday life, how the institutions of everyday life have been designed and influenced by our historical experiences, how they influence the design of oneself, the narrative of oneself, the narrative of what is visible and what is not, what is silence and what is not silence, and how this all constructs my sense of self, and where I am placed, and how I'm placed, and how that constructs my memory of where I'm coming from, memory of who I'm connected with, who I'm relating with, who I'm allowed to relate with. And so all this data affects my brain computer, my human machine, to kind of foresee as to how I can possibly paint or instill myself onto that canvas. I talk very abstractly because I'm a visual person, but I hope that that you at least understood in a way.
I think we can deal with it. I would like to ask you to give us a clue about your work as a theater maker in this context, but I guess we have to postpone this because I just want to ask Urvashi and Mark about one idea concerning the connection between racism and memory.
Okay, I'll come in quickly with the one idea because there's a lot one can say about it. So in order to understand the complex country that India is and was, our colonial masters created a lot of classifications based on certain kinds of identities. A lot of them were racial identities, many were ethnic identities, and of course, there was also religious identity. The racial and ethnic identities cast people into a mode of othering. So for example, tribals, certain tribals were called, they were said to be animal-like and such like. And that has very much impacted how they are perceived in our society today the entire region of the northeast part of India, which is ethnically, racially very similar to Burma and other places on that border, have been othered in very deep ways. So racism plays itself out in our society in the present in this way. But I do want to say that the danger of saying, what did colonialism do to the present day manifestations of something like race? It's almost like you blame everything on colonialism and there's no fault of our own. And I want to say these fault lines often exist on the ground, and then they are picked up and built upon, as colonialism did very deftly and skillfully, and we completely played into that. I haven't even talked about religious divisions, which is really the most divisive thing in our country today, but that also was a result of colonial power, manipulation, and so on. But since you asked about race, I've stuck to that a bit.
Okay. Mark, one thought on this topic? Oh, I can't hear you.
Yeah, do you hear me now?
Yeah, better.
Okay, I'm really sorry. My internet connection didn't work for the last 3 minutes or so. Now I found an alternative, so I didn't hear at all what you were saying. I'm really sorry for that. Maybe you can repeat it and then.
It's still this one question with perhaps very quick answer because we are starting the Q&A in a minute. Do you see, of course you see connections between racism of today, current racism events, and the practice of memory?
Yeah, sure. There are connections between the past colonialism and the racism of now. I mean, you can find it in every dimension. I mean, I just want to mention one example. I mean, if you look at the most racist slurs in Germany, then there are the words Kanake and Fidschi. Western Germany. A bit historical right now, but there was always the word Kanaka, and in Eastern Germany the word Fidschi, and they stem from the Pacific region, where German colonial empire was, for example, in Polynesia, whereas Polynesia were the paradisical islands of the German, in a way, the wellness islands of the German Empire. The Kanakan lived in New Caledonia, which was not part of the German Empire, and the Fidschis in the Fidji Islands, which was also not part of the German Empire. And these regions in the German colonial imaginations were the barbaric regions. So the first racist slurs for immigrants to Germany stem from the overseas history of German colonialism in the Pacific region. And so this is a kind of very interesting example for this kind of connection with overseas colonialism. And if you look at the Balkans, for example, the ideas about Greece during the so-called debt crisis go very, very long back in history to the 19th century and to German imperial expansions to the east.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'd like to pose you one or two or three questions that our public has asked. The first being the following: how can we create alliances between different groups and deploy them in political action? How can we fight racism? Big question. Who wants to answer?
Nelago, I'm sorry.
Nelago.
You were starting.
Yes, it's a very difficult question. It's a very difficult question. How one can formulate and organize to fight a superstructural disease. There are various ways that this can be done, but I think one way I can enter into this discussion is being accountable. How can we all be accountable in the spaces and communities that we come from? How can we be responsible in the spaces and communities that we come from? In my language, we have a saying that says, when you have dust underneath, which means, why is it that you go clean someone else's house when your house is as dirty and your cause is to go clean dirt into the street. So that is just to say, for me, I am very much interested into how we can, as we say, Bantu Biko, an ancestor, he says that, you know, many them, especially with our particular experience with apartheid and colonialism, is that there are many of those that have the passport that allows them to be nourished, that allows them privilege from these superstructures. And one has to look at this passport, this book that you have, and really work and analyze and work within the community that you come from, and the way that you benefit from these structures, and the way they oppress and continue to hold supremacy of other people within these structures. So I think for me, if we talk about alliance, we can really talk about being accountable and being responsible and being active and really working against these structures and these interconnected situations and live situations within these structures, and that you can work against, and that in a way works with time against this fight that we're all trying to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have to say that I find the idea of the alliance, although it is very much in the discussion right now, a little bit ideological, because I think that the alliance
a little bit
ideological. Because I think that the precondition for the idea of alliance is always that there are, in a way, different communities or different positions, fixed positions from where you always are talking. And I think that if it comes to the German society, I mean, things are not as monolithic as this alliance suggests. So if you look at different communities, what are they? The communities of origin, evidently, then there is a lot of struggle in these communities. There is a lot of positions in these communities. I don't want to deny or refuse or to make invisible power relations, but I think we're not at the starting point for common politics, for a common ground to protest things is not the idea that we have to make an alliance, but we have to find the points in which the communities are already broken or do not function, or the idea of the we is questions, and so on. And I think when it comes to if it comes to politics, then I mean, before you have the alliance, there has to be the goal. So what are the political goals actually of this discussion?
Okay, I like to say I hear you and add another question from our public. Isn't remembrance a process which goes through different phases? After having dealt with the Holocaust and World War II, the debate in Germany at least seems to have recently shifted to colonialism. Do you agree? Two parts in this question. One Germany, one more general, remembrance as a process with different phases.
Could I come in on the process part of it, just to say that, yes, I think it is a process. And I think that there are moments when if you are the person who's remembering, live with that memory, and it is meaningful for you, but it doesn't actually acquire a larger meaning unless there is somebody to listen to it, unless there's somebody with whom you can share that memory. And that historically in different countries, in relation to not the private memory of small, but major historical events, let's say, or the memory of race, there are moments where it becomes possible to articulate those memories. There are moments when society is less ready to listen to them, to receive them. There is a hospitable atmosphere, and that memory then emerges from the private into the public in some ways. So yes, it is a process, and I think it's the same process everywhere. I'm speaking from what we've learned here, but I think definitely it's a process.
Okay. I'd like to read a last question from our public, which perhaps allows to talk about the theater thing one time. Except schools, what are other spaces for negotiations about memory? Nelago.
What are other spaces about negotiations for memory?
Mhm.
For me, I think it's all spaces of people activity. I would not want to say that there are more possibilities of survival or opportunity or potential for a group of people than there is in another space, because life does not necessarily work like that. As we kind of echoed, it is very interconnected. So I think it's an everyday thing that finds itself in everyday situations and in everyday institutions. So that is it's in religion, in the various whatever it is that we believe or think or analyze a religion to be. It's in law, it's in education, it's in arts, it's in economics, it's in sex and gender, it's in labor, it's in all the areas of people activity. And I am not one to deny that there's a kind of a magnitude of a process that happens in this area than the other, because they're all such functioning, high driving engines of life and systems.
Okay. Want something to add?
René, a
Yeah.
quick word, if I may. It's not to do with this, it's to do with the business of alliances. When I was listening to Mark, I was thinking that Mark obviously hasn't seen the alliances built by the women's movement worldwide. Sorry, Mark, I couldn't resist that. But because we allied together with all our differences, we were able to, for example, get violence against women recognized, get rape during war recognized as a weapon of war and as a war crime. And though there can be profitable alliances, there can be useful alliances. I understand everything you're saying about internal differences. And I want to point out one quick other thing. When there was a conference on race in Durban in South Africa, they invited Dalits, that is the so-called untouchable caste people from India. And that alliance and that recognition was really important for getting the Dalit voice out into the international arena. So let's not diss alliances. They do work sometimes.
No, I didn't mean it that way. I didn't mean it that way at all.
I know you did.
I just had some critique that about the meaning of the word alliance. I'm not against people gathering together with their differences for one certain political goal, but I mean, I find it very interesting that we at a given moment sometimes there is the discussion about the alliance before there is the idea of the goal of the alliance. You know, and as you mentioned about the protests you participated in, there was a goal. There was a clear idea of what you wanted to achieve, and so that I'm not against. I'm really sorry. Yeah, I'm not against alliance. Definitely not.
Okay, I take let's not disalliances as the closing words, if you agree on that. And I'd like to thank you a lot for this association between Namibia and India and Germany. I thank Urvashi, I thank Nelago, and I thank Mark. See you, I hope.
Thank you, René.
Thank you, René.